The Catcher in the Rye, my favorite book about depression, fights, and sex. Perfect for a bunch of high schoolers to read, because there really is nothing more school appropriate than that. Anyways, our story begins with our protagonist, Holden Caulfield, a depressed teenager who thinks everything is phony. I'm sure there's a mental disorder out there with those symptoms, but what do I know? Speaking of mental disorders, he's in a mental institution at the start of the story, getting ready to tell us what happened the Christmas prior. If there's anything I have learned from school, is that all roads lead to mental institutions, because let's be honest, there always is something wrong with everyone. Just kidding, only myself. Snaking images off the internet is fun though. So he starts off talking about his brother DB, who's a writer in Hollywood and earning good money, but according to Holden, he's doing a real snobby job and selling himself out, kind of like a prostitute. Coincidentally, he calls him one too. Maybe he really is a prostitute in Hollywood, but hey, who am I to judge? Holden thinks that his brother is a really good short story writer because of this one story he writes called The Secret Goldfish, where a boy refuses to show anyone the goldfish he bought with his own money. Honestly, completely understandable, because let's be honest, if you bought a shit ton of expensive vegetables, I'm pretty sure I'd also be hiding it from the local police and crackheads. Actually, I'm 100% sure, because I'm in the process of doing that right now. I love doing the good work of Mother Teresa. Anyways, he finally gets to the store and he goes to a school called Pensy Prep, which already makes me think of kids going to school in suits and ties, while also having the most expensive sex toys hidden in their rooms. Anyways, Holden says it's a snobby school full of so-called phonies. Spoiler alert, it's not the last time he says the word phony. So it's a Saturday, and there's a big football game, and everyone is there, but Holden doesn't want to watch the game because he wants to visit his history teacher, because he recently got kicked out for failing school. Let's be honest though, as much as failing every class except for English is bad, he made the rational decision of not watching a football game when he can go see his history teacher. Because hey, who the hell plays a game called football when it's actually played with hands? Don't take that out of context, though that'd be kinda hot. Anyways, he goes and sees his history teacher, Mr. Spencer. When he gets there, he's freezing cold and talks with him. He basically starts off with a small talk about failing school, but then goes off on him like a missile strike in Syria, or I guess in this case, since it's right after World War II, a bomb underneath a certain Adolf Hitler's table, about how Holden knew absolutely nothing about history. God, he's almost as bad as Ted Bundy. Almost. Anyways, the conversation ends when Mr. Spencer starts talking about how life is a game and starts singing the song The Game by Motorhead, and Triple H appears behind Holden, performing a pedigree and winning the WWE World Championship for the first time. Holden leaves and Mr. Spencer yells good luck at him, in a real heartwarming way. Though Holden thinks it's depressing. It might have to do with the fact that he just got beat by a professional wrestler for the world title and nearly broke his neck from that pedigree. But it might be something completely different, though I highly doubt it. Anyways, he starts ranting about the Undertaker, and his real name is actually Ossenburger, and how he made a lot of money from burying dead people, and how he finds it stupid and phony. I'm pretty sure he wasn't just dumping bodies into rivers. I'm sure there was some crack cocaine, hardcore Tylenol in it too. But in all seriousness though, his job is very serious. In the words of Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers in the court, he did it for the boys. Though I guess in Jeff's case, it was quite literal. Anyways, he goes back to his room in the dorm, where he shares a room with a guy named Stradlater. Apparently, he's a good-looking jock, but in Holden's eyes, there's a lot of better-looking dudes out there. Though he was friendly. His neighbor is Robert Ackley, who is about as friendly as a bunch of crackheads trying to rob you for vegetables that you just stole from them. Ackley walks in on Holden and starts clipping his toenails and popping pimples over the table as you do. They start talking about Holden's newly bought red hunting hat, and how as the very responsible fencing team manager, he left all the stuff on the subway. Right, I forgot to mention that. But just imagine leaving a bunch of sabers in a subway. I know I wouldn't be that forgetful. I only forget my mother's birthday. Then Stradlater enters the room, and Ackley immediately leaves, kind of like school children when they see Bill Cosby. Holden and Stradlater talk about Stradlater's date, who is Jane Gallagher, who knows Holden very well. Holden starts talking about Jane and what they did together back in the day, playing checkers and all. God, what a boring time they must have had. Though I guess Holden's a depressed, horny teenage boy, so I guess he found that fun. He then starts going on and on about how he should say hi, but he doesn't because he's not in the mood. He's almost as indecisive as Amber Heard's lawyers when they're trying to make an argument. Stradlater then shaves and borrows Holden's coat and goes out on the date once again. But before he goes, he tells the guy that failed every subject except English to write an essay about a room, or something like that. Like, I get he's half decent at English, but just looking at his average, I'd rather ask my grandmother to write that essay, and she doesn't even speak English. In fact, I don't even know her actual name. Holden decides to write about the baseball glove from his dead brother Allie, who died of leukemia. He was 2 years younger than Holden, and he died 2 years prior. On that glove were a bunch of poems, so he could read them on the pitch if he got bored. Like, I know this is supposed to be sad, but my god. Poetry? Of all things. Anyways, before he started with that task, he goes to see a movie and eats burgers with one of his buddies named Brossard and Ackley. They end up having a snowball fight, and they return home afterwards, where Holden writes an essay with all his emotion. Stradlater comes home from the date, reads it, but doesn't appreciate it because it was supposed to be about a room, so Holden rips it apart. What a soulless human being, not even caring about the poor guy's mark in English class. In the words of Jesus Christ, some people deserve to be burned in hell. Anyways, the two of them have an argument about Jane and how Holden suspects that Stradlater did a Prince Andrew to her in a teacher's car. I was about to say that he'd get arrested for that kind of shit, but I forgot it's the 1950s, so it's basically a fair play on his part if he did. Kind of messed up, but if you remember that people tried to marry Richard Ramirez in prison, and the one that did marry him only divorced him after finding out that one of his victims was a 9-year-old, it's not that messed up. Actually, never mind. I don't know where I was going with that. But seriously, this dude touches others. Sure. And murder puts people to sleep permanently, quite often. And gets sentenced to not 1, but 19 death sentences. And you still marry him. But one 9-year-old is where you draw the line. Remember, that was not his only underage victim. I guess you could really call him Dick Ramirez, because that's short for Richard, and he really was a dick. Sorry for the weird turn. Anyways, Holden and Stradlater get into a fight about it, losing literally immediately. He then says that he lost the 2 other fights he's been in. I mean, like, that's why you don't mess with the Sinaloa cartel, or Mr. Spencer. Holden decides to barge into Ackley's room while still bloodier than Flanders Fields in 1917, and sits on Ackley's absent roommate's bed. God, what a dick move. But Ackley treated this as relatively annoyed at first, to having an it is what it is attitude. Coincidentally, that's what Winston Churchill said when the Nazis took over France. Holden decides it's better to book it out of there and go back to New York. Then go home on Wednesday, so his parents would already get the news, and according to his logic, not be as mad. Not gonna lie, I think your logic is almost as flawed as Hitler's. Almost. Kind of. Not really. He decides to pack his stuff and sells his $90 typewriter for $20. Just for reference, that's like selling a $1,500 thing for $300. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that that was tactical. For what? I don't know. Anyways, as he walks out, he yells down the hallway. How come when he does it in a boarding school, no one comes out to punish him, but when I do the same thing in a hotel, I get kicked out? Bullshit. No, but seriously though, he'd quite the balls to do that. Sorry, I shouldn't be assuming genders here, but my god is it hard. Kind of like my... Okay, no, never mind. I almost forgot this was for school. Anyways, he hops on a train to New York, where he meets the mother of Ernie Morrow, where he lies about his name and how Ernie acts in school. Who is Ernie, you may ask? Well, he's a phony, apparently. Anyways, if there's one thing that this part of the book taught me, is that Holden is a thing for older women. Quite the opposite of Jeffrey Epstein. But anyways, I respect his decisions. Compared to Mr. Epstein, anyways. Well, when he gets to New York, he gets a taxi. Now, if you read the book, he states in the chapter earlier that it's too late to get a taxi. Honestly, I'm starting to think that Holden's love for New Yorker taxis is greater for those from Pennsylvania. I don't know whether to call it racism, but I'll call it just that for the hell of it. Anyways, he asks the driver if he knew where the ducks went in the winter when the lake freezes over, and he gives him the very reasonable answer of, "Do I look like I'm a duck expert?" Well, Holden does the equally reasonable thing by asking the taxi driver if he wants a drink. Now that's straight out of a Mad commercial. In the words of my alcoholic hockey coach, never drink and drive. Holden then gets dropped off at the hotel and makes fun of the poor people, the bellboy, and then goes to his room. As the bored little schmuck watches two people squirt whatever liquid they could get their hands on at each other, he starts to feel horny. God, I feel like I'm narrating an extremely corny porno. What a weird job to have. He would decide to call up a former strip entertainer, and I guess you could say friend, to someone who Holden once knew, named Faith Cavendish. Well, I think we all know what happened. Nothing. Yes, he screwed that up. Terribly. Who would have guessed? Though the only thing I learned is that she's from England. Though based on that last name, I should have picked up on that one. While in the hotel room, he goes on and on about his younger sister Phoebe, who he seems to like a lot, based on the fact that she's smart, pretty, and they're related to one another. Well, that's pretty sweet of him, until you realize that he's sitting in a bar trying to pick up some girls and really looking at their asses the entire time. What a horny little man. I'm pretty sure he lacks respect for them, though. Not sure why. But maybe he kept on describing them as a bunch of dumbasses, and 2 out of 3 of them as ugly. He also thought that 2 of them were sisters, which pissed them off a little. I mean, I'd be a little pissed if someone thought me and David Duke were siblings. I mean, me and David Duke aren't even friends, like in the context of this. After all, I'm not white, and he's the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. He then goes on about how he and Jane Gallagher met, and what they did over the summer, and stuff like that. But you know what came first? What Jane and Stradlater might have done in that teacher's car. Not gonna lie, that's not quite kosher. He snaps back to reality and realizes he wants to go to another bar called Ernie's, so he gets another taxi. I told you, he loves New Yorker taxis, possibly in an intimate way, but I'm not here to judge. He asks this taxi driver if he knew where the ducks went in the winter, and he started rambling about the fish, and they got into an argument, as you do. I didn't read too deeply into this conversation, but the driver 100% had committed bestiality before, and he's probably proud of it. He then goes on a rant about how Ernie was a decent person at piano, but he's a show-off at a phony. The people around him are jerks, started drinking vodka, and feeling like a prize horse's ass. Just kidding, the vodka part was fake. Soon afterwards, one of DB's old girlfriends came over and said hi with her date, who's a Navy guy. When I say old girlfriend, I mean former girlfriend. Not an old lady in a retirement home. Though the older lady kink Holden has, it might run in the family too. Anyways, they invited him to drink with them, but Holden refused, saying he was going to leave anyways. I hate calling people dumb, but what a goddamn idiot. He just could have said no. Well, now that Holden had to leave because he said so, he did, and he walked all the way back to the hotel. Then he gets into what he would do to the guy that stole his gloves at Pensy. Being a self-proclaimed pacifist, he'd confront the thief in an extremely aggressive way, but then just leaves him alone. Truly like what Gandhi would have done. Anyways, he's in the elevator. Some guy asks him if he's feeling horny for a prostitute paid friend with benefits, as Holden says yes, but doesn't want no old bag. Wow, my friend is as inconsistent as John Wayne Gacy. 1 second, he's a beacon of society, or in Holden's case, into older women. And the next, he's murdering teenage boys. Or in Holden's case, not liking older women. But you have to respect the big dog, as in the elevator pimp, because he offers it for $5, or $75 today. Honestly, doing the good work of Mother Teresa. Anyways, the elevator guy tells him to pay the prostitute friend with benefits and leaves to get the escort. While he waits, Holden starts to feel horny again, but starts talking about how he's a virgin. Weird flex, but okay. He also talks about how he respects boundaries and knows that no means no. Bill Cosby could really learn from this kid. Okay, no, actually maybe not. Anyways, the prostitute escort knocks on the door, and she's about as old as Holden. Naturally, Holden begins to feel sad about this and doesn't feel horny anymore. Who would have guessed that an underage prostitute is a sad sight? It certainly would have been the opposite if Holden was Prince Andrew. Anyways, all he wants to do is talk, and Sonny, the name of the escort, gets annoyed with him and wants her money. $10. If you remember correctly, like Holden did, it was actually $5, and he only gives her $5. What a lad. Sonny decides to book it on out of there, and Holden just sits in his room. And he starts talking about his dead brother Allie for a bit, and a memory he feels guilty about. I'm sure that was important, but this has already lasted long enough, so no. Anyways, He starts talking about how Jesus' disciples were a bunch of dicks and how he enjoyed that one guy in the Bible who got drunk. God, I meant to say Bible, not Bible, or whatever the hell I just said. Holden isn't religious, but I'm sure that deep down he's really just a Christian enthusiast. But seriously though, I love the fact that he refuses to have premarital relations with the prostitute, then immediately starts thinking about Jesus and the Bible like a good Christian boy. Anyways, someone knocks on the door and he decides to open it. Turns out it was that pimp and Sonny who are on the other side. The pimp guy removes his costume, and I kid you not, fucking Maurice from the Madagascar movies is the pimp. I really like crazy crossovers. First Triple H, then the Undertaker, and now Maurice from Madagascar. I respect the creativity. Anyways, Maurice tells Holden he wants his money, as in $5, and then decides to smack the living shit out of Holden while Sonny takes the $5 from his wallet. God damn, I really didn't realize how much of a badass Maurice really is. After they leave, Holden imagines himself shooting and killing Maurice like a poacher. I think he'd be happy to hear that the forests in Madagascar are being torn down nowadays, giving lemurs less homes. Or he'd be mad pissed to hear that the people are trying to save the environment, saving lemurs like Maurice in the process. Honestly, I'm leaning towards the first one, but give me your opinion in my report card. He then says he wants to jump out of the window, but doesn't because he doesn't want a bunch of people staring at his gory body. I too wouldn't want a bunch of necrophiliacs staring at my body, dreaming of whatever fantasies come to their heads. He ends up sleeping for a bit, but not too long, as he smokes cigarettes, trying to fix his medical problems, but it ends up making it worse. Just kidding, he probably did it to make it worse. He then thinks of giving Jane a call, but decides to call up Sally Haye, an old acquaintance of his, who he thinks is a phony bastard, but is pretty, so he decides to make a date with her. What a great message to send to children. It doesn't matter what their personality is like, if they're pretty, they're the one you should go for. Anyways, he checks out the hotel and goes for some breakfast. While eating, he meets some nuns. He's really indulging himself in Christianity. What a king. Anyways, he sees their suitcases that look pretty run down, and he starts ranting about poor people. He then goes up to them and asks them if they're taking donations, and they say no. He donates some money anyways. Turns out, there are some school teachers from Chicago, and one of them teaches English. Like any sane teenager would do, he initiates a conversation about Romeo and Juliet. He talks about how Mercutio was his favorite character, and how he felt sorry when he died, but he didn't when Romeo and Juliet died. Fair point, because two teenagers, one 18 and the other 13, who love each other, are responsible for a bunch of deaths, and then they die because their plan was about as good as the Austrian battle plans in Ulm. Spoiler, their plan was pretty stupid. Almost as stupid as Romeo and Juliet's plan. He then rants about Catholics, asking others to see if they're Catholic, and then does a quick 180 and talks about money because why the hell not? He leaves the nuns and starts thinking about random people trying to collect donation money, like his aunt or Sally Haye's mother. See, now he's back to having a kink with older women. Anyways, he decides to buy a record of Little Shirley Beans, which is sung by a girl of color, and he starts ranting about the difference between a white girl singing and a girl of any other race singing. Weird, but it's the 50s, so we'll let it slide. Anyways, the record is for his sister Phoebe, and figures that he'll buy it near a roller park that Phoebe goes on Sundays. I forgot to mention it's Sunday now. While on his way, he saw a poor family walking around with their son, who was singing "If a Body Catch a Body" coming through the Rye, and it made him feel better and no longer depressed. The power of music, I guess. As he got to the store, he bought the record and he felt even happier. So he decided to call Jane, but her mother answered, so he hung up. I'm pretty sure I would have done the same thing, as having to talk to someone else's mother is like the 10th layer of purgatory. He goes on and buys tickets for a play to watch with Sally. He goes on about how she's the queen of the phonies and how the actors are obnoxious and how they don't act like actors. But my god, Holden, if you hate Sally so much, why in the goddamn hell would you date her? Oh wait, she's pretty, so I guess that overrules everything. Love to see it. Sally is apparently really fond of some actors called the Lunts, so he buys tickets that they star in. I'm sure Holden would agree with me on this, but I hate people that know the names of the actors in movies and stuff. Like, I don't care what Johnny Sins' real name is. I mean, it might be his actual name. I'm not going to search that up, nor do I recommend you do it. He then takes the cab for a bit, describes the park of having a lot of spit, cigarette butts, and dog shit everywhere, and then continues to the mall. Gotta love New York during Christmas, as it really embraces the true emotions evoked on Christmas Day. Sickness, drug abuse, and feeling like shit. God, I love this story's realism. He goes to the mall to meet his sister, but he doesn't find her there to his surprise. There were a few kids playing a Walmart version of softball and a bunch of random kids skating. There really truly is no place like New York where you could skate over a mixture of frozen spit, dog diarrhea, and God's nectar all at the same time. God's nectar is water, by the way, as it really is the essential to life. Anyways, he met some kids trying to tie their skates and went over to ask them if they knew Phoebe. When they said yes, he helped her tie their skates. What a nice guy. He was told that Phoebe was at the museum, but since the kid got the wrong date, he decided to put on his red hunting hat and walk there anyways, as you do. He also starts talking about one of his teachers he used to have and how nice she was. As he got there, he realized he didn't really want to go in, so he took another taxi to where he was supposed to meet Sally for the date. Bro's just walking around with as much confidence as he's going as a crackhead. He's at the meeting place, but he got there early, so he does what your average single, middle-aged pasty man does, and stares at every single teenage girl there. Unlike a single, middle-aged pasty man, Holden thinks about what would happen to them in the future, whereas the middle-aged pasty man would imagine them all naked and in his basement, begging for his mercy. Anyways, he starts to feel depressed because he believes they'll all marry a bunch of lousy dudes. When he said that, I was thinking of someone like John Wayne Gacy, but I forgot they got famous, so scrap that idea, and God, my English is terrible. Whether he got famous for the wrong reasons is fully an opinion. Give me 100% on this project if you think that he got famous for the wrong reasons. Don't give me 100% if you believe serial killers are good people. Sally finally shows up, and they took another taxi to the theater to watch the show, where Holden tries to seduce Sally. Chapters like this is why I go to school, because screw Pornhub. Just kidding, they didn't do the lubby-dubby. It would have been a sin if they did. After all, they aren't married. They watched the play, and Holden didn't think it was that bad, though he criticizes everything about it and how phony it was. I would describe it here, but you've probably been sitting here for quite a while, so I won't. I also kind of think that Holden actually didn't like the play. Who would have guessed? After the play, everyone went outside and started smoking. God, it's like they promoted smoking back in the 50s. Eventually, some person that Sally knew came along and Sally went over to talk to him. Holden describes the conversation as, say it with me, phony. As they talk, Holden starts to feel like he actually hated Sally for the phony conversation. Wow, it's like he never knew that he hated her for being a phony. Anyways, Sally comes up with the idea of ice skating, and Holden says why not. He then talks about how Sally gets a skirt at the rink and how he really liked her ass. I mean, fair enough. They end up skating, and he described that their ankles were essentially touching the ice. I'm going to go on the leg here and say that they're a bunch of amateurs. As a hockey player, I know for a fact I probably would have embarrassed the living shit out of the two of them, and it would have fed my extremely fragile ego. They end up sitting down for a drink, and Sally asks Holden if he's actually going to help her trim the Christmas tree at her place. A small detail I forgot to add in very on in the script is that Sally wrote a note to him asking him to come over and trim the tree. I don't know if that's very important, but due to the fact I forgot that, like how I forgot I'm going to the funeral the other day, I'm going to say that it probably isn't. Holden then goes on about life and basically why he hates it and why everything sucks. All Sally had to say was to please not shout, which if I was talking with a person who was depressed, the last thing I want is someone asking him if they're okay, because that's just awkward for me. And no, I'm definitely 100% not a narcissist. He then talks about cars and horses and why horses are better. I mean, it's pretty obvious though. The Brazilian government sanctioned a human horse porno, not a car human porno. Checkmate car people. Anyways, he goes on about why Sally is the only reason why he went to New York, and then talks about why school is utter garbage for him. Side note, I forgot this was for school, but I'm lazy, so you should just take that as an oopsie. Don't remove a mark if you believe that mistakes happen. He then goes on about running away with Sally and how he wants to do it now. Holden, buddy, I'm pretty sure you guys are still children. Coincidentally, that's basically what Sally said. She also says, what if they run out of money, and actually talks like a sane person, and that if they were to do that, they should do it after college. It worked about as well as walking into a crack house and asking everyone to form an orderly line. Yes, I stole that joke. Anyways, Holden says running away from college is very different from doing it now. Sally disagrees, and they both really don't want to be around each other. Then smart guy Holden tells Sally that she's, and I quote, a royal pain in the ass. As you could guess, that went quite well, and Sally starts crying and Holden tries to apologize, which she is pretty unimpressed with. She ditches him and Holden starts to feel bad. Good job, Holden, you basically did an Amber Heard. Shit the bed. He goes to a drugstore and buys and eats a cheese sandwich. If you expected me to make a drug joke, well, too bad, because it wasn't a drug warehouse. Anyways, he thinks about giving Jane a call, but then starts to think about his past with Jane and a person that she used to date, and he basically goes off on him for being a complete snob. Based on what I can assume is not a biased opinion, I completely agree with him. He calls her, but she doesn't pick up. He then calls Carl Luce, which I'm going to call Carl Luce because why not, who Holden describes as smart, and you know the word, you love this word, phony. God, I'm actually starting to think that secretly, deep down, he actually likes phonies. Luce said he'll meet him for dinner at 10 o'clock, so to kill time, he watches another goddamn movie. Dude, stay consistent with what you like. Please. For everyone's sanity. He came into the theater, but the stage show was on, and they were performing some cult ritual to summon the almighty Santa Claus. Or something to there. He then describes how bad it was, except for this one drummer Allie really liked. The movie comes on, but what do you know, Holden hated it too. He ends up ranting about how phony it is. What a shocker. He goes to the bar that he and Luce are supposed to meet up at, but he thinks about war. It's a really descriptive part, so I'll happily skip it. But he did say that he'd be the first to ride an atomic bomb if he could. I mean, that's a pretty cool way to die, and I'm not even gonna lie. Imagine it saying, on your tombstone, died while riding an atom bomb. Pretty sick, not gonna lie. He listens to some French girl sing at the bar, and he says that it's bad. He says the bartender is bad, and he also said that the 1919 Treaty of Versailles was also pretty lousy. Well, when Luce shows up, Holden says that he's an expert at finding every person's sex life and knows every single gay man and lesbian woman in the world. I'm pretty sure Luce is probably gay if he knows that much. Luce then orders a whiskey, and Holden tries to make jokes with him, but they're all pretty bad, and Luce just tells him to grow up. Luce then reveals that his girlfriend is in her late 30s and she's Chinese. Holden makes fun of him for this. As a Chinese teenager, I kind of agree that it's kind of weird for a newly graduated guy to date a lady in her late 30s. And having an interracial relationship in the 50s is definitely not the smartest move. Luce then calls him immature, again, and then he leaves. Holden then says he's a royal pain in the ass. Actually, no, just a pain in the ass. Holden would then get drunk, and when a new pair of fellas started singing, he attempted to ask one of them out, and went as far as a soldier in no man's land. He then calls up Sally as a drunk, and she somehow deals with it very well. Holden, being drunker than my hockey coach, just kidding, no one can be drunker than my hockey coach, just stands in the phone booth, menacingly. No, seriously though, he just stands there, not calling anyone, and then he staggers around and asks the singer's partner to ask her out for him. Again, it doesn't work. What a surprise. He ends up leaving the bar, not before trying to ask out another worker there. Like, at what point does this just become harassment? Anyways, he leaves and he magically feels less drunk. He walks around, again, thinking about ducks, and then he drops the record he bought for his sister. What a silly buffoon. He then finds the frozen lagoon, but then feels like he's gonna die, starts thinking about his possible funeral, and then thinking of Allie's funeral. He then realizes that he's pretty well out of money, and decides to walk home. Well, it doesn't surprise me that he's out of money, since he rode so many goddamn taxis, but it surprises me that he didn't ride another one, even though he's broke. He then gets to his home, and the elevator guy's a new guy. Holden tells him that he hurt himself, so he wouldn't get suspicious. The funny thing is that he wants to meet his sister, not the rest of his family. Not gonna lie, that's awfully similar to how Ted Bundy killed his victims, and his victims were usually younger girls. Now that's one hell of a coincidence. I also find it funny that the people he said he was visiting are called the Dicksteins. Real creative, J.D. Salinger. God, am I immature. He then tells us that his dad could sleep through a terror attack, a nuclear war, and quite possibly the children yelling in my basement at night, but his mother would wake up if your bed in another room creaked. Anyways, he figured that Phoebe would be in DB's room. After all, it's big and spacious, and he's in Hollywood. Though I think that's a minor factor. Anyways, we learn that Phoebe doesn't like her middle name. I mean, who does? Holden then decides to read everything Phoebe wrote, like what any fine stalker would do. He also enjoys it, which should be a concern for the NYPD. He wakes up Phoebe, and to my surprise, she doesn't immediately scream, because that's what I would do if someone woke me up and they were someone that I didn't expect to be home. And if my vocal cords could. She tells him that she has to be Benedict Arnold in a play, and she thought he'd be home on Wednesday. To which he replies with something along the lines of, "Well, you're wrong," and says that he got out early. They end up talking about some stuff for a bit, and Holden lights up some cigarettes as you do. Then Phoebe realizes he got kicked out and basically starts telling him that their dad will kill him. He didn't, based on the fact that the story is a flashback. Phoebe then puts a pillow on her head, probably to try and tune out the sound of their dad talking to Holden outside, having a very respectable talk, putting Holden on his knees, putting a gun to his head, and pulling the trigger. Gunshots are pretty loud. He decides to leave the room for a bit and goes to the living room just to get some cigarettes. I think he may be addicted, based on the fact that he smoked an entire pack and needs more. When he came back to the room, Phoebe took the pillow off her head. She probably realized that her dad wouldn't use a gun without the silencer on it. They talk about him getting kicked out of school, so he rants about how Pansy sucked and how everyone is a phony. Based on the fact that it's the 20th time he rants about Pensy, I'm really starting to think that he actually didn't like Pensy. Anyways, he said that even the nice teachers, like Mr. Spencer, were phonies. I mean, if he was secretly hiding Triple H in his closet to jump me, I'd be pissed too. God, my English is terrible. After what I could only imagine was a couple solid of hours, Phoebe would ask Holden if he liked anything. I'm sure that's a question everyone reading this novel had, and we actually might get an answer. Finally. Holden, not surprisingly, couldn't think of anything because he was too emotional and couldn't focus. God, I wish I could tell my ex-girlfriend, who had a twin that I accidentally kissed. I tried to explain, but she kept on saying we aren't even identical twins, and that he literally had a penis. Anyways, what he could think of is this one kid who jumped out of a window and died in one of the schools that Holden went to. Didn't know Holden liked dead people so much. But after some silence, Holden replied with their brother Allie, to which Phoebe said he was dead. So Holden sat there like a Nazi war criminal waiting for his sentencing in the Nuremberg trials, and replied with talking with his sister. To which Phoebe said, that isn't really anything. I too think that quality time with family members isn't really anything and a waste of time. Phoebe then asks Holden what he'd want to be as an adult, and he replies with the lyrics of, "If a body catch a body coming through the rye," which is the same lyrics that the kid from earlier was singing. Too bad the lyrics are actually, "If a body meet a body coming through the rye," and that's what Phoebe told him. To which he does the mature thing and leaves the room to call an old teacher that he hadn't liked, Mr. Antolini. He basically tells him that he flunked out of Pensy. Again, weird flex, but okay. Holden would return to the room as some music filled the room because Phoebe decided to play some music. I mean, I guess that was pretty obvious, but whatever. Holden asks her if she wanted to dance, and they do. I feel like in any other context, a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old dancing at night would be kind of weird. You're welcome for putting that picture in your head. After they finish dancing, Phoebe tries to show Holden some online scammer shit by telling him that she can give herself a fever, to which Holden plays along. All of a sudden, their mother wakes up, and Holden hides in the closet like a kidnapping victim hiding from their kidnapper. Their mother walks in and asks Phoebe if she was smoking, to which she said she only had one cigarette, and their mother is like, "Don't do it again or there's going to be severe consequences," then leaves. Coincidentally, that's what Benita Kwan says every time she sees a student outside a classroom during fit. Holden would come out of the closet, not in a figurative, brave, and honorable way, but more of a literally fell out of the closet way. He decides it's better to leave the house and asks Phoebe for money, and she gives him $8.65 or $140 in today's money. Congrats, Holden, you're no longer broke, you're in debt. All of a sudden, he started to cry, and he left via the stairs. You gotta respect the exercise that Holden is doing by using the stairs rather than the elevator. Anyways, he heads off to Mr. Antolini's place for the night because I forgot to tell you he invited him to stay there. When he gets to Mr. Antolini's place, he describes Mr. Antolini as not much older than DB, but someone who married someone who is far older than him. Nothing like seeing a cougar and a gigolo in this story, too. Anyways, they talk about how he failed every class except for English class. Mr. Antolini gives him some real smart person words I don't really want to talk about, but he really says that Holden's going for a terrible fall. But Holden yawns, so they make the couch for Holden to sleep on. Now that's rude, but seriously though, sometimes you just can't help it. Just like how Ted Bundy couldn't help but murder a bunch of random teenage girls. Anyways, they finish making the bed. George Foreman comes up behind Holden and smacks him harder than a 50s husband did to his housewife, and Holden falls asleep. I swear to God, every teacher has some sort of enforcer secretly hiding in their house. Tell me who is you sitting in your closet to jump any guests that come in your house in my report card. Holden wakes up to Mr. Antolini patting his head. He freaks out, thinking that he was going to get seduced or something, and hurries on out of there. To be completely honest, I would have stayed for those reasons. Just kidding, that's pedophilia and that's wrong. Mr. Antolini just lets him go, unlike John Wayne Gacy did. When he got outside, it was just getting bright again, and he headed to the subway station where his bags were. He started to feel more depressed than ever, which is really saying something. What it is, I don't know. He started to feel bad about leaving, so suddenly, and got more depressed. He decided to walk and eat some donuts and drink some coffee, but he couldn't swallow the donuts too well, so he didn't have any. Donuts are literally just bread in a funny shape. So stop complaining, goddammit. As he walked around, he saw that it was very Christmas themed, and he tried to find the nuns from earlier, but he couldn't find them. So he thought of old memories, because, that's what you do. I'm pretty sure those nuns aren't interested in premarital relations with Holden, though. After all, he is a Christian enthusiast, but they are actual Christians. All of a sudden, the LSD that the barista snuck into Holden's drink started to kick in, and he started thanking Allie that he was able to cross the streets and that he would never go back home, never go to another school again, and pretend to be a mute because that's what you do in life. Try to be a mute for the rest of your life. It happens to the best of us. He decides that he's going to say one last goodbye to Phoebe, though, and return the Christmas money to her. But before he did, he needed to buy some paper for a note to give her at school, really making the most of the money without making it look like he spent too much money. Honorable. Anyways, he goes to the school and then writes the note on the school stairs. He wanted to drop it off at the principal's office, but on the way there, he stumbles into a "fuck you" written on the wall. Wow, it's really like Santa came early. He proceeds to rub it out. Don't take that out of context. He makes his way to the office where an old lady was at the front desk. He gives her the note, and she takes that as a sexual advance and tells him that she doesn't date gold diggers. After all, she was wearing a stupid amount of Gucci that would even make Kim Kardashian look like she came from Skid Row. He tells him it's for her sister, and the old lady agrees to give it to her at lunch, but proceeds to give it to another old lady. Holden leaves the office and the original old lady yells good luck to him, kind of in the same manner as Mr. Spencer, and Holden's PTSD kicks in as he gets ready to counter Triple H's pedigree, but instead of finding a mostly naked man on steroids only wearing a thong, he finds another fuck you on the wall, but he can't rub it out. Again, don't take that out of context. He decides to go to the museum and stumbles into a few kids. He does the natural thing and tells them about the mummies. Remember that he knows shit all about history. Wow, Holden, you're setting a great example by telling them misinformation about Egyptians. And we all know in the future they're going to flunk out of school and storm the Capitol on January 6th. Just kidding, I was lying about the flunking out of school part. He stumbles into another fuck you, but this time in red crayon. I'm sure if Crayola had commercials of people writing fuck you into walls with their crayons, more teenagers and young adults would start buying their products. Anyways, he says that someone will probably write fuck you on his tombstone. But let's be honest, it's probably going to be a derogatory slur as it is the 50s. He goes to the washroom where he has diarrhea and then passes out. He then collapses. Don't worry though, a few clues tell us that he didn't suffer from a heart attack. For one, he wakes up. Anyways, he starts to feel better and starts thinking about the cabin he'll run away to and that he'll invite his family over as long as they don't do anything phony. God damn, I definitely didn't see that coming at all. He starts to feel worried as Phoebe doesn't show up, but she ends up coming very late with a bunch of bags. She says she doesn't want to let him go without her, and he feels like smacking the 7 shades of shit out of her because he doesn't want her to tag along. Don't you love it when there's domestic violence in a book? He ends up feeling bad, so he leads her to the zoo and decides not to go and run away. They see a couple of animals, and then they arrive at the carousels, and Holden tells Phoebe to go ride it, and he just sits back and watches. He lets her go on it multiple times, even when it starts to piss harder than when I go to the washroom with a stomachache. While watching, he finally feels happy, to the point where he nearly starts to cry. As much as I like to joke around, the ending is just so wholesome. Actually, I lied, it wasn't the end. He finishes the weirdly specific flashback by saying he isn't going to say any more. Not about the school he's going to in September, or anything else. But he did say that DB has an English girlfriend. Maybe it's Faith Cavendish. Anyways, DB asks Holden what he thinks of all this, and he doesn't really know. But he did say the more you talk about something, the more you miss it. Like how he's starting to miss Ackley, Stradlater, and even Maurice. I too would miss a future sex offender, a womanizer, and a talking lemur who's a pimp. You don't really see that every day, do you now? So what's the moral of the story? Some might say that depression is bad. Others would argue that you should pay more attention in school. Some would say that growing up is a challenging thing and that you can't do it alone. In my humble opinion, I believe it's a combination of all those things. However, the biggest thing I learned is that I'm better at Holden at skating, and he can suck it, and that Triple H, The Undertaker, George Foreman, and Maurice the Lemur were all alive back then. God, I love Maurice. Not even a joke. I hope you enjoyed the video, but please, make sure to give me a massively high grade on this project. And don't forget to send a letter to the VSB saying that the students at Kitsilano will throw a coup on the office on the last day of school, and I will lead the bloody charge to victory. Don't take that seriously, and have a good night.
It's all about the game, and how you play it. All about control, and if you can take it. All about your debt, and if you can pay it. It's all about pain, and who's gonna make it? I am the game, you don't wanna play me. I am control, no way you can shake me. I am heavy debt, no way you can pay me. I am the pain, and I know you can't take me. Look over your shoulder, ready to run like a Cleveland bitch from a smoking gun. I am the game, and I may lose. So move on out, you can die like a fool. Trying to figure out what my move's gonna be. Come on over, sucker, why don't you ask me? Don't you forget there's a price you can pay. 'Cause I am the game and I want to play.